Grace to you and peace from God's beloved. Please be seated. We're continuing our series, Great Cloud of Witnesses, with Hildegard of Bingen. Over the last few weeks, we've been looking at figures of the faith we may not be familiar with and exploring how their life and faith impacts our world today. And I chose that Bible passage mainly because of Mary, and I always connect Hildegard with Mary for giving so much of herself and giving so much of beautifying the world because of her faith. Because Hildegard of Bingen was an exceptional woman. She excelled in a vast array of human endeavor, any one of which would have secured her place in history if left on its own. And she's been lifted up as the prototype of women's advancement because of her achievements in a world where women's accomplishments weren't readily recognized or welcome. Well, Hildegard referred to herself as a member of the weaker sex, she called it. Her massive output of labor and outsized influence in a large number of fields show that she was equal to or even greater than many men of her age. Weak is definitely not a word to describe her. Hildegard didn't dabble. She was no dilettante. She dove headfirst into vast oceans of inquiry, mastering each of them. Science, medicine, the arts, theology, linguistics, politics, all have her fingerprints on them. She composed music, including what became known as the first opera. She wrote books, she preached sermons, created poetry, invented an alphabet, penned letters to important people, and published academic works. She led an abbey full of nuns. She counseled kings and popes. She traveled widely, preaching to crowds, overseeing a large religious revival. And she did all of this while suffering from a stubborn migraine. What have you done with your life? Hildegard was born around the year 1098, and she was the 10th and last child born to her parents, Mechthild of Merxheim-Nehat and Hildebert of Bermersheim. And since she was the 10th child, she was what was called a tithe, a familiar word. Tithe meaning 10 in the Bible, either for offering, 10% of your income goes to God, that sort of stuff. So her parents, being the 10th child, gave Hildegard to God's service. Hildegard, according to autobiography, started having visions when she was 3, and they followed her throughout her life. When her parents offered her to the Benedictine monastery in Disi-Bodenberg, Germany at the age of 8, she was received alongside with an older woman named Jutta, who, it is believed, taught Hildegard to read and to write. Hildegard understood her life and her work through her mystical experiences which were not often welcome because they made her physically ill. And while she believed her experiences were direct encounters with God, she believed that God was asking her to write these down. And when she saw her experiences, to put them to paper. And when she did so out of obedience rather than out of joy. She kept putting off the writing, these visions down, because they took a huge toll on her health. And these visions aren't what we would recognize. These weren't dreams that she was experiencing. They were full-bodied experiences where every human sense was set on fire. It was like she was living a revelation, not just witnessing it. The visions took hold of her whole being. She called this the shade of living light. And this was God's way of speaking to her and through her. But as I said, these experiences weren't easy for her. She finally gives in and she writes about these moments, and she says, "But I, though I saw and heard these things, refused to write for a long time through doubt and bad opinion and the diversity of human words, not with stubbornness, but in the exercise of humility. Until laid low by the scourge of God, I fell upon a bed of sickness. Then, compelled at last by many illnesses and by the witness of a certain noble maiden of good conduct, which was the nun Richardis of Benstedt, her best friend, and of that man whom I secretly sought and found, who was the Benedictine monk with the great name Volmor, as I mentioned above, I set my hand to writing. While I was doing it, I sensed, as I mentioned before, the deep profundity of scriptural exposition. And raising myself from illness by the strength I received, I brought this work to a close, though just barely, in 10 years. And I spoke and wrote these things not by the invention of my heart or that of any other person, but as by the secret mysteries of God, I heard and received them in the heavenly places. And again, I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Cry out, therefore, and write thus." And she did. These writings of these visions shaped the church for centuries. The Pope at the time, Eugene III, recognized their importance, and then she was named a doctor of the church by Pope Benedict in 2012, and her influence is still felt today. And like my introduction to Martin Luther, my first encounter with Hildegard was when I was studying music. As a composer, her work pushes boundaries. She was self-taught, so she wasn't fully constrained by the musical conventions to which others were bound. So she could get more creative. And she wrote the words to her songs as well, writing in the church's official Latin, as well as the vernacular of her time. And she used language expressively and creatively. Her rhetorical imagination joined with the musical originality and produced some of the most dynamic music of her time. But she found that the Latin wasn't getting to where she wanted to go. So she developed her own alphabet to work with, to make her words fit better with her music. And if you look at the characters of her alphabet, it looks like something from Lord of the Rings. And I can't help but wonder if Tolkien was inspired by Hildegard. Although she pushed boundaries in words and music, she still worked within the confines of recognized liturgical frameworks, by which I mean that her music could be used at worship and everyone knew what was going on. Her music didn't push people away. It deepened their artistic awareness. And her music was deeply personal. Her music was a spotlight into her inner life. In a short piece we're about to listen to, Hildegard shares with the listener a profound experience she had, an experience of God that shaped her. This is a brief excerpt from her morality play, Ordo Virtutum, which is the Order of the Virtues, which became the first opera. This is the first musical drama that has survived fully intact. The next one doesn't arrive until a century later. And in this song, we'll hear an expression of intimate, even erotic love, where Hildegard feels God's adoring strength deep within her body. It's a soulful rendering of love captured and divinity yearned for. This is called O Dulcis Divinitas. O sweet divinity, O delightful life, could I carry you in you the garment of light and receive back what I have lost with my first appearance? To you I sigh and call upon all virtues. To hear her words is to peek into her unique relationship with God, when that relationship was at its most intimate. For Hildegard, God is nothing more and nothing less than love incarnate. And that love is felt within her mortal frame, so she can experience eternal life while her heart is still beating for her beloved, and she still draws breath for songs of praise. And she calls this incarnate love caritas, which is the Latin word for God's love for humankind. Caritas, in this next song that we'll hear for Hildegard, is the embodiment of God's fiery love, a love that creates and sustains all things. It's God's love, free and wild and dancing through creation at will. It's the wind that blows wherever creation calls, unrestrained and uncontrolled. Caritas is the fire of God's love, burning with passionate intensity, never quenching, always bringing heat and light to the cold, dark places of this world. Because this next song brilliantly sums up how she saw her faith and lived her relationship with God, which formed the foundation for her massive output of labor. Because for Hildegard, love or caritas is always embodied. It is never an abstract concept. Caritas, God's love for everything, is living, breathing, bleeding. It's laughing, it's crying, it's longing. Caritas love is wrapped in human clothing as a means of closeness. Because for her, physical intimacy is an expression of the connection God has for human beings and for every creature on earth, a connection that God seeks with every living being. Because there is no place so hidden, no corner so dark, no human so lost, and no soul so abandoned that God cannot find them and be found with them and for them and draw them in with love. And this is what we hear her say in the second clip, Caritas abundant in omnia. Loving tenderness abounds for all from the darkness to the most eminent one beyond the stars. Exquisitely loving all, she bequeaths the kiss of peace upon the ultimate King. Although Hildegard lived the life of a mystic, she was also deeply immersed in the life that was happening outside of her doors. She was both a thoughtful visionary and a hard-nosed pragmatist. The two were inseparable because God held the two together in Jesus. God wasn't just a mystical presence out in the universe, untouched by human chaos. But in Jesus, the beauty of God in the heavenly realm meets the pain and heartbreak of human living. But no one had to tell her that. Hildegard felt both of these in her body. She saw with her own eyes the power of a God whose beauty overwhelmed her, and also lived with the consequences of those encounters as she endured constant pain, while still leading and innovating in a multitude of human enterprise. And her immense labor was a response to caritas, God's love for humankind and every created being. Because it was caritas that strengthened her. It was caritas that sustained her. It was caritas that empowered her. Caritas is a reminder that God's love cannot be destroyed. It can only create. Even in the darkness, God's loving tenderness endures. Caritas is as personal as it is cosmic, intimate as it is universal. Caritas speaks into your life with a delicate whispering voice and soft yet glowing light into your dark edges. In the darkness of longing, God's tenderness finds you. In the darkness of doubt, God's light shines brightly. In the darkness of grief, God's comfort brings healing. In the darkness of estrangement, God's love brings reconciliation. In the darkness of God's absence, God hangs a star. For Hildegard, God's love is as much gentleness as it is fire. It's as much a small candle lit in the vast darkness of the world trapped in night as it is in the roaring thunder of creation. And that is her gift to us. Hildegard's curiosity was so vast, and her work took her to so many fields of inquiry because she kept on seeing God in so many different places. in the plants that were growing in her monastery garden, in the physical healing she found through medical exploration, in the cut and thrust of her world's political machinations, in the creativity of the arts, which sang praises to God. Because there was nowhere that God wasn't. Even in the darkness of her constant pain, she somehow sensed that she wasn't alone. In the deep human relationships she cultivated with others, she knew that they were knit together by God. In her leadership, navigating the treacherous roads of negotiation and diplomacy, and shepherding a growing family of sisters, she believed that she was tasked to model Christ-like love to those under her care. Has there ever been a time for you when you didn't see God, where you didn't know where God was, where God appeared to be absent from your life? Has there ever been a time when God seemed to be playing hide and seek with you, and God seemed to pick the absolute worst time to do this? At least not present to you in the way that you need. Hildegard knew what that was like. And while she saw God everywhere, she had to fight to get there. She had to work at it. And while she was given her mystical experiences, she also went through those moments where she felt like God had left her to fend for herself. And that's when her eyes opened. That's when she began to notice God working silently, hidden but not erased, quiet but not silent. Because we have a temptation to think of God as chief miracle worker. And God certainly is that. God certainly works beyond the bounds of human comprehension. But God also works in the quiet stirrings of creation, in the hushed tones of kind words, in the familiar voice of your beloved, in the caring glance that you needed, in the quick touch of the hand. Even in the pain of losing a loved one. Because within your eyes lie love. Even in the moments of failure, because they teach you how to rise. Even when your body is breaking down, it tells you that you are alive. You are still a creature created by a creative God. If Hildegard has a message for us today, I think it's this: open your eyes. There is more of God in this beautiful world than you realize. Open your eyes. God is doing more in this place and among this people than you can see with the naked eye. So open your eyes. God is doing more in you than you suspect. God is changing you, shaping you, guiding you, leading you, and challenging you in ways you may not see in the moment, but are evident as you look back on your life. So open your eyes. God, who never stumbles nor sleeps, is active and alive. Slowly, through countless acts of kindness, through numerous expressions of compassion, through myriad moments of mercy, through untold deeds of generosity, through the indwelling spirit of creation, the one who hovered over the waters of chaos when God spoke the world into being, is working in you. And then look back, with your eyes still open. Look back at our mother Hildegard, speaking to us from a 1,000-year expanse, yet pointing us to the living God who is right here, right now, at this moment, still creating and recreating a world that God so loves. And may this be so among us. Amen.